The Untold Journey of Ethan Vale. They will tell you that Ethan Vale was a genius, a tyrant, a savior, a fraud. That he was a comet that burned the sky and vanished before anyone could hold it still long enough to name it. But these are the histories that fit into headlines. This is the longer story, the slower story, about a boy who believed machines could listen to the human heart, and a man who discovered that success is just a mirror with no glass behind it. If you listen closely, you might still hear him in the hum of a server room at 3 a.m., in the click of a factory light turning on, in the soft scuff of a janitor's shoe, in a lobby named after him. And if you follow the whisper of rumor to the end, you might find a door half open, a single note tucked underneath, and a question no one has quite answered. Where did Ethan Vale go? And why? 1. The Boy in the Workshop. By the time Ethan was 7, he could take apart any mechanical pencil in the house and put it back without biting the eraser once. His mother, who kept books like other families kept pets, alive, cherished, crawling into every corner, watched him with a kind of careful affection. His stepfather, a welder who came home smelling like iron and rain, built a small bench in the garage and told him, "Everything is a system. Every system has a seam." The town was ordinary and inland, the kind of place where freight trains drew lines across the day, and people folded those lines into their routines. Ethan liked the library more than the playground, but he loved, more than anything, the quiet click when a circuit closes and the light answers yes. He learned early that electricity is a language that hates to be wasteful. He tried to learn it the way his mother learned poetry, by speaking it until it sounded like prayer. In the summer he found old computers put out on curbs and rolled them home on a skateboard. He learned to boot machines from floppy disks in the school's forgotten lab. He learned to solder from videos that buffered forever on a dial-up connection. He put notes on his bedroom door. "Do not enter. System in progress." He learned quickly that people respected the word system. It sounded like a promise and a threat. When he was 12, a thunderstorm hit the town and killed the power for most of a day. He sat in the garage in the damp heat and listened to the rain punching the roof. The lights were dead, but the radios, if you held them just right, could still catch a station or two in crackling fragments. He opened a radio, touched a wire to a battery in a way nobody had taught him, and the voice came back into the room, as if the air had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. His mother put a hand on his shoulder and said the sentence people would repeat later, for years in profiles and commencement speeches. "I don't know how to raise you, Ethan, but I know how to let you be raised by your curiosity." 2. The first failure that mattered. At university, Ethan studied what wasn't on the syllabus. He stayed up all night reading white papers on distributed systems, cryptography, neuromorphic chips, anything that proposed a complicated problem with a simple promise. His roommates called him a walking future, which he found embarrassing and slightly funny, because the future is a thing you never quite arrive at. It keeps moving, like a tide line that mocks your wet shoes. He started a small company with friends, a campus marketplace that solved, in theory, the problem of unused assets and idle hours. They built it fast, printed flyers, wrote code, skipped lectures. A professor warned him that every solution inherits the rot of the question. But that sounded like a riddle, and he was busy. They launched. For 3 days, the traffic spiked. On day 4, it crashed. On day 5, someone pointed out that the campus already had an official portal that did 90% of what theirs did, with fewer bugs and better branding. On day 6, Ethan sat alone in a lab and stared at a blinking cursor until it felt like a heartbeat doing Morse code for "try again." The failure cost him money he didn't have, and friends who were kinder in retreat than in partnership. He learned something about the kind of silence that follows bad news. It's thicker than the kind that precedes it. He also learned that he couldn't quite stop. There was a seam somewhere he hadn't found, and he could feel it under his fingers even when he wasn't looking. 3. The note and the basement. The second company started in a basement that smelled like dust and coffee. There were 3 of them this time: Ethan, a designer named Mara, who could make a button feel like an invitation, and a back-end engineer named Jin, who rarely spoke in meetings but hummed in code reviews. They were trying to build real-time translation for the workplace, speech-to-text, that could strip jargon and replace it with clarity, then learn from corrections to make entire teams more honest. Meeting saw rituals around confusion, Ethan said. What if a machine could clear the fog? They called it Clarion. They ran out of money in 9 months. They wrote to investors who replied with form letters, when they replied at all, saying the space was crowded and the incumbents were large. Ethan sent a last-ditch email that read, simply, "We reduce waste. Time wasted misunderstanding. Money wasted correcting it later. Trust wasted because no one knows if they're aligned." One investor sent a one-line reply, "Trust is not a line item." They folded. Mara took a job at a design studio with soft chairs and free lunches. Jin left for a cloud company whose recruiters sent cheerful emails with the subject line, "Let's build the future together." Ethan stayed in the basement a few extra weeks because he didn't know where else to go. He slept on an air mattress and woke to the sound of the building's boiler. He ate rice with eggs and learned to like it. He kept a notebook filled with phrases he would later call sharp questions. He circled one so hard the paper nearly tore. What do humans want machines to do that humans cannot admit they want? On the last day, Mara slid a note under the basement door. It said, "You are building something that scares them because it makes meetings shorter. Build something that makes them feel larger." Ethan stared at the paper and felt the hinge swing. 4. The spark that caught the third company began as a tool for truckers. It was Jin who called him with the idea, laughing a little at how unglamorous it sounded. There was a regulation change coming that would require better logging and route optimization. Existing software was clumsy. Drivers were bleeding minutes into hours into fines. "We can fix it," Jin said. "We can show them we understand the seam." Ethan borrowed money he would feel guilty about later. He convinced Mara to moonlight. They met in diners off highways and wrote down features on napkins. They kept a whiteboard in Ethan's kitchen with 4 words at the top: time, fuel, safety, pride. He underlined the last one 3 times. "We build for dignity," he said, half to the room and half to himself. They shipped in 6 months. The app did not look like a tech product. It looked like a dashboard that trusted the person behind the wheel. It showed only what mattered. It said please more than it said must. It made suggestions that felt like hunches offered by a friend. People told other people. A union rep called it a tool that doesn't scold. A large fleet signed a pilot, then a contract, then a multi-year deal. They called the company North Star, then changed it to Vale Navigation after a lawyer pointed out a conflict. Reporters started to call. The early pieces were small and local. Startup saves drivers time. Ethan answered with lines that made sense in kitchens and boardrooms. We help people take back what's already theirs. He remembered the thunderstorm in the garage and the way a clever connection can make a dead thing speak. The first big investment round felt like walking into sunlight after months underground. He bought his mother a washer and dryer that sang a little tune at the end of the cycle. He bought himself nothing, at least not at first, because he was afraid that if he did, he'd start to think the buying was the point. In year 2, they expanded from trucking to delivery, then public transit analytics, then emergency routing for ambulances that needed the green wave and couldn't afford to wait for city procurement cycles to catch up. The platform evolved from suggestion to orchestration. The analysts in big firms started calling Vale a systems company, and Ethan tried not to flinch at the word. 5. The mirror with no glass. With scale came scrutiny. Some cities balked. Unions loved the early wins, but worried that optimization would become a weapon. Ethan walked into meeting rooms where the air felt like it had been held too long. He learned to speak in a way that sounded transparent, without revealing the parts he didn't know how to say out loud yet. That any system that improves a process will eventually ask why the human is still part of it. That any efficiency is a temptation. That he was building something that would eventually look at him and say, "We can do this better without you." He hired a head of policy who told him that stories beat spreadsheets. He hired a general counsel who told him that stories need footnotes. He hired a chief of staff who told him that he could not keep showing up everywhere like a firefighter. "You will set fires just to be the one to put them out," she warned. He laughed and then stopped when he realized he believed her. He grew sharper. He wore the suit that looked expensive without looking new. He learned to wait one beat longer than most people did when they were asked a hard question. He learned to say "we" so often that he sometimes forgot, alone in his hotel room, that there was an "I" at all. The press turned a little. A think piece argued that Vale was too powerful in the gray space between public and private infrastructure. Another asked whether it was appropriate for a company to decide how a city breathes during rush hour. A podcast ran a series about invisible hands on your steering wheel. Ethan went on as a guest and said, "We serve the public interest because our customers demand it," which is the kind of sentence that sounds noble until you try to diagram it. And then there were the rumors. A competitor filed a suit alleging that a former employee had walked out with proprietary data and that Vale had looked away, rather than looked too closely at what she carried in. The employee, a mid-level analyst named Farah, denied it. The story died and then came back twice. Each time it returned, it came with new names attached, like barnacles. Meanwhile, Vale announced something that made even its supporters uneasy. Horizon, an AI coordinator that promised to manage not just routes, but decisions. Not a recommendation engine, Ethan insisted in media briefings, but a negotiation engine. One that could balance competing priorities: cost, time, human preference, public policy, without privileging any one stakeholder consistently. We built a way for systems to be honest about trade-offs, he said. The alternative is the lie that there are none. Cities loved it. Critics loathed it. The stock market, when Vale finally went public, loved controversy more than it loved safety, and the price floated up into rare air. 6. The memos and the night. There's a story some people tell, as if they were there, and maybe some of them were. It's the story of the night of the 3 memos. On a Tuesday in late autumn, in the headquarters that smelled like coffee and ozone, Ethan gathered the executive team. On the screen, 3 memos waited, typed in the stripped-down font he preferred for anything serious. Memo 1. An internal audit on data provenance in a pilot city. It found that a third-party contractor had scraped a competitor's public API beyond the agreed limits and cached data in a way that violated both the spirit and letter of a partnership. The contractor said it was an over-enthusiastic engineer acting alone. The audit suggested otherwise. The legal risk was significant, but manageable. The ethical risk was harder to quantify because it refused to sit still. Memo 2. A proposal from Horizon's team to expand the AI's remit to micro-incentives. Tiny, dynamic payments to nudge drivers, dispatchers, and even commuters to choose differently during peak hours. It would cost real money and alter human behavior in ways that would be hard to roll back. The models showed spectacular gains in throughput. The write-up was elegant, the kind that made you forget someone had to live inside the curve. Memo 3. A draft of a personal letter Ethan had written and never sent to his mother. It wasn't meant to be on the screen. He'd been copy-pasting notes, maybe, moving too fast. But there it was in the corner thumbnail, and someone clicked it by mistake, and the words filled the room before anyone could stop them. "Mom," it began, "do you remember the power outage? How we listened for the station in the static? I keep thinking about that night. I keep thinking that what I do now is the same thing, a bigger version, trying to pull a signal out of the noise. But I'm worried lately that somewhere along the way I started to confuse the signal with the sound of my own certainty." No one spoke. Ethan's chief of staff moved to close the window. Ethan raised a hand. "Leave it," he said, but not with pride. More like someone who understands that a wound needs air. They debated until midnight. The audit would be handed to regulators before the news could find it. The micro-incentives would be postponed, then studied, then renamed. The letter would never be mentioned again, except that everyone present would think about it, privately, at odd times, the way certain songs insist on returning when you're stuck at a red light. When they left the room, the hum of the building seemed louder than usual, like the place was trying to tell them something and had lost the words. 7. The disappearance that was not. He didn't disappear, not at first. He took a sabbatical, the kind CEOs take when they are either burnt out or being prepared for a controlled exit. He called it a listening tour and visited places that made the PR team nervous. Union halls, fire stations, small clinics, schools where the network went out in the middle of the day and no one could afford to fix it. He spoke less on that tour than he had in years. He asked simple questions and let them ring. What's the hardest part of your day? Where does the system make you feel small? If there were a dial you could turn, what would it control? In a community center on the edge of a city he had once reshaped without knowing any of its street names, a janitor handed him a Printed email. It was addressed to Ethan from a name he did not recognize. The subject line, "You don't know me." The message was short. "I was the driver you met at the pilot rollout. You told me the app would give me back an hour. It did, for a while. Then they changed the routes to fit the app, and I lost the hour somewhere else. You didn't lie. But the system did what systems do. It took the hour from a different pocket. Whose pocket do you want it to be?" Ethan folded the paper and put it in his jacket. That night, in a motel that smelled like lemons and old carpet, he wrote a reply and did not send it. He slept badly, dreaming of meters ticking and doors that didn't quite latch. After the tour, he came back thinner and quieter. The board liked the thinner. They didn't like the quieter. He proposed changes that sounded like confession disguised as strategy. Stronger unions at partner companies. An independent ethics review with real veto power. A wall between data science and sales so high you'd need rope and courage to climb it. People nodded. They referred it all to committee. At a quarterly meeting, a director asked him, "What do you want, Ethan?" He said, before he could stop himself, "I want the machine to tell the truth." There was a pause, long enough to have a second meaning. "About what?" the director asked. Ethan said, "About the cost of being efficient." A month later, he took another leave. No one used the word ousted. No one needed to. The stock dipped and then stabilized. An interim CEO took the stage and did the careful, well-practiced version of empathy. The press talked about founder fatigue and the challenges of founder-led governance. Ethan moved out of his apartment and into a smaller one. He gave away a couch that had seen too much late-night strategy. He placed a plant by the window and watered it with the kind of attention he used to reserve for enterprise clients. He went for walks and tried to remember how to be a single person rather than a company in a suit. And then, some say, he disappeared. But that isn't quite right. He just stopped being where people expected to find him. He showed up in places where no one knew his name. He bought a used truck and drove west until the road ran out of the particular kind of ambition he recognized in himself. He kept a notebook. He wrote, "Build smaller, build slower, build like you have to live in it." 8. The letters. Months later, letters began to arrive at Vale's headquarters, handwritten, postmarked from towns with names that sounded like lullabies. No return address. Inside each envelope, a page or two, sometimes 3, in Ethan's tight, careful print. They were not instructions. They were not memoir. They were not apology. They were questions, mostly, and sketches of ideas that felt both obvious and radical. He wrote about building tools for care workers that did not track them like delivery drivers, but supported them as if they were the infrastructure of a city, because they are. He wrote about open protocols the company could support and not own. He wrote about an operating principle that made some executives roll their eyes and a few put their heads in their hands. Prefer the small reversible decision over the large irreversible one, especially when the spreadsheet argues otherwise. He wrote, in one letter, about the contractor audit. He did not excuse it. He did not perform outrage. He described the incentives that made the offense likely and proposed incentives that would make it harder next time. He ended with a line that read, like it had cost him to write it. When your system rewards a behavior, it has already chosen its ethics. Your policies are just commentary. The board reviewed the letters in executive session. Some wanted to publish them as proof that their founder remained a moral compass. Others argued that they were liabilities waiting to be subpoenaed. The General Counsel wrote a memo in which every sentence had been sanded until it had no corners. The letters remained in a folder marked "Personal Materials," which is how important things get lost. Outside the company, rumors swirled. Someone claimed to have seen him in a diner off a desert highway, drawing network diagrams on a napkin and tipping too much. Someone else swore he was in a coastal town, renting a garage and building something with fans, which could have been anything from a ventilation system to a cult. An influencer posted a photo of a man with his back to the camera on a cliff at dusk, captioned, "The myth is real," then deleted it after the comments filled with threats and prayers. 9. The return that was not a return. A year to the day after he left, Ethan walked into a municipal building in a city that had turned down Vale twice. He requested a meeting with the head of Public Works, and because small offices still remember what courtesy is, he was shown into a room with 2 flags and a map on the wall that hadn't been updated in a decade. "I'm not here as Vale," he said. "I'm here as a citizen with a design." He laid a blueprint on the table, a low-cost system for monitoring water quality block by block, using off-the-shelf sensors and a network protocol so simple that teenagers could maintain it for civic credit. It would not make anyone rich. It would make the city a little more honest with itself. "Why are you doing this?" the official asked. "Because I forgot who I was building for," Ethan said. "I want to remember." They piloted it on 3 blocks. It worked. People got interested who didn't usually get interested, people for whom city planning felt like a show playing in a room they were never invited to enter. A local nonprofit adopted the project. A student at the community college wrote a manual as part of a class. The water map hummed in a browser tab, and once, in the middle of the night, pinged a warning that led to a fix that no one noticed, because nothing broke. This did not make the news. It was too small and too much like the future when you live inside it. A series of problems that do not happen. Ethan built other small things after that. A scheduling tool for a free clinic that did not overbook because it assumed humans are units. An app that helped a school coordinate parents who didn't own cars. A piece of open-source code that made city budget PDFs readable to people whose jobs were not reading PDFs all day. He released these under a name no one recognized, and some other names, and sometimes no name at all. People who knew him wondered if he was happy. Happiness is a blunt instrument. He looked like someone who had traded volume for clarity, and the exchange rate was finally in his favor. 10. The last meeting. So far. One winter, a journalist who had covered Vale from the beginning found him. She did not write about how she did it. She simply met him in a cafe in a city he had never lived in and placed a recorder between them. He tilted it away. "Off the record," he said. She shrugged. "On the human," she replied. "How does it feel," she asked, "to walk away from something like that?" He thought for a long time. "I didn't walk away," he said. "I walked toward something else. The fact that one looked like the absence of the other, that's a trick of perspective." "Do you regret Horizon?" she asked. He smiled without showing teeth. "Regret is another word for unlearned. I'm still learning." "What are you building now?" she said. "Less," he said, and let the word settle. "I'm building less." I'm building like the world is a place we have to share with people who will never know our names." "Do you think you'll go back?" she asked. "It depends what you mean by go back," he said. "If you mean run a public company again, I don't think I have the stomach to pretend that earnings calls are prayers. If you mean help build infrastructure that tells the truth about itself, I never stopped." "People miss you," she said. "They miss the story you used to tell." He looked out the window at a bus huffing to a stop, at people lifting their collars against the cold, at the way a city choreographs itself without rehearsal. "Stories should miss us too sometimes," he said. "Otherwise we become the story, and that's how you break a mirror." She did not publish their conversation, not the way she could have. Instead, she wrote a piece about what happens when famous people choose smaller rooms. It went viral for a week, and then sank, steady, like a stone that had found its water. 11. The envelope under the door. If you go to Vale's headquarters today and walk the hall where the executives borrow sunlight from glass, there is a door at the end with a small scuff at the bottom left. Every few months, an envelope appears under that door. Security cameras never catch who leaves it. Inside, there is usually one page. Sometimes it is blank. Sometimes it has a sentence so clear it feels like a number. One spring, the page read, "Remember the seam. Build so the seam shows." Another time, "Make your incentives audible to the people you claim to serve." Once, "If you cannot explain the trade-off to a night shift nurse in 5 minutes, you are lying to both of you." The interim CEO became the permanent one. She keeps a copy of those sentences in her desk. She does not call Ethan. She knows he does not carry the phone number she has anymore. Some employees have come to believe the letters are a myth, written by someone in comms to keep the founder aura glowing. Others swear they saw the scuff fresh one morning, as if a boot had brushed the paint on the way out. The truth is less cinematic. Myths are how organizations keep asking questions they're afraid to pin to a single name. 12. The pocket with the hour. On certain mornings, if you stand in the right place, in the right city, you can see the shadow of a man who is not trying to be seen. He will be talking to someone who does work that cannot be easily priced. His hands will be moving, the way hands move when they're sketching in the air. He will be asking the same question he asked the day he read that driver's email. Whose pocket should the hour be taken from? He will be trying to build a machine that gives the hour back without taking it from a different pocket. He will fail, because time is not a ledger you can balance, but he will fail in ways that feel like kindness. He will fail and then try again with smaller levers. He will still keep notebooks. He will still underline. He will still hear, sometimes, the rain on a garage roof and the faint radio voice that means the circuit is just barely holding. He will write to his mother and tell her that he is still listening for the signal and still wary of the sound of his own certainty. He will end a letter with a line that, if someone ever finds it, will make them breathe in and hold. I believe in the system only as far as it makes room for the person walking through it at 2 a.m. with a job to do and no applause to follow. 13. What we choose to believe. The thing about stories like this is that they leave spaces where people can write themselves in. Some will decide Ethan was a coward who walked away when the world needed him to stand and take the heat. Others will canonize him as a prophet of smallness in an age of endless scale. Some will dismiss him as a privileged tinkerer who discovered ethics like a new hobby. Some will tell their kids that once there was a man who learned how to say no. If you ask me what happened, I'll tell you what I know. A boy learned that any system has a seam. A man learned that seams are where the truth breathes. He built a company that tried to make time. He built another kind of life that tried to make meaning. He learned that you can be right and still be wrong in the way you're right. He learned that the only honest algorithm is the one that admits what it cannot see. There are people still waiting for him to take back the stage, to announce the thing that will tilt the world again. There are people, fewer but loud in their quiet way, who hope he never does, who hope instead that he keeps handing hours back, one pocket at a time. 14. A question for you. So now I turn it to you, because stories like this are really mirrors for the listener. If you were Ethan Vale, builder of systems, breaker of mirrors, what would you do with the hour you could give back to someone? Would you return it to the driver who missed his daughter's recital? To the nurse who needs 5 minutes to breathe between rooms? To the janitor who keeps the lobby shining in a building that forgot his name? Where would you put the hour? And what trade-off would you admit out loud? What is your opinion? And if you enjoy this kind of story, deep dives into untold journeys, near true lives, and the questions that keep the night bright, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this.